You hated the half marathon.
I hate it. Yeah, I did a half marathon in 2019 for a charity.
I remember that.
And the 2 hours it took me to run the half marathon, I hated every minute of it. I couldn't walk for a week after. Do you think humans were meant to run?
Yeah, totally. The survival instinct. I've seen it multiple times where people download these apps because these apps claim to be the best thing out there, and you see more injuries from the apps than you would see for someone who just sort of listened to their body and understood what's right for them and what's not right for them. We're trying to change the scene and have topics around amenorrhea, the lack of menstrual cycles, the fact that women's hair loss or blocks losing their libido, and this is in the running culture and it's already been
really. I had no idea
behind this. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of really fit females out there that probably either aren't getting their period, aren't getting it frequently enough, or the flow of their period isn't as consistent as it should be. Your body is not producing estrogen that is consistent to what your body requires.
There's a guy that's always sort of, chasing his legs, as Adrian calls it. And this is basically his leg in front of him, and he's like stacked behind.
Is that me?
That was me. Yeah, that's definitely you. I'm the same as well. Good nutrition, good sleep. These are the powerhouses of recovery first and foremost. Everything else is just secondary.
Today I'm joined by Rushabh and Adrian from R&D Physio and the Running Room, where we dive into all things running. So I've recently started running a little bit more for our Muay Thai fight. I've got really into it. I'm increasing my mileage, doing more and more runs, and I'm looking to optimize more of my technique so I can run better, more efficiently, and get better times. So I recently went down to the running clinic at Rushabh and Adrian's place to get my running analyzed, and I really enjoyed some of the insights I got. So I said to the guys, you guys got to come on the podcast. So yeah, I brought them on and we discussed everything from technique mistakes to why, who should run, who shouldn't run, what are some of the dangers to consider, various things around eating disorders in the running culture, and a whole host of different topics around running. So I think you're really going to enjoy this. If you're interested in cardiovascular fitness, into running, or wanting to get into running, this is the episode you won't want to miss. Okay, so why do people love running?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for the most part, running is one of those things you can just lace your shoes up and you just get going, right? You don't have to call your mates and go, hey, do you want to play football tonight? Oh man, we got 4 people, we need 8. You just lace up, you go, off you go. You go for 5K, 10K, 1K, it doesn't matter. You go out there, you get an endorphin rush, you feel good about yourself. It's both physically and mentally good for you. So I think it's one of those things where people go, I can do this by myself, I feel good, it's healthy, don't have to rely on anyone. And I think, for a certain person, it's really good.
It's free.
Yeah,
it's free, man. I think one of the craziest things about all of this, and especially the sort of latest stats about running, and especially post-COVID and everything else, but running is still the #1 sport in the whole world.
Really?
Yeah, there's nothing else that beats it. So you will find more runners than any other sport out there. And with runners, it's the thing, whether you run a 5K, 100 yards, 200 yards, a lot of them identify themselves as a runner first, and that identity as a runner is huge. And it's growing more and more as we sort of go through this sort of marathons, the half marathons, the 5Ks, the 10Ks. The identity of a runner is huge. And I think that plays a big, important part. And when we talk about the free part, as things change, more and more people are finding that what can they sustain for long, that's not going to basically affect them long term in terms of like back balance and stuff like that. So, a lot of the guys, I just like running. Just like running. The idea of being free, feeling free while they run.
Yeah, and you guys deal with a lot of runners of all different sorts of backgrounds and calibers.
Sure.
What's the reason they run for? And why do they want to get better at it?
I think everyone's why is different, right? Like you have some people that are trying to better themselves or go faster. You have some people trying to compete with their friends. And you have some people just running for mindset. Like literally just going out there to clear their mind, and it's a mental health thing. So there's a good saying a friend of mine says, like, he's got a pocket full of whys. So I think every person probably has a number of whys. So then you can then imagine that variability across the board. So I think it's so varied.
It's the same thing. Why would people sign up to health changes?
Yeah.
The whys are so profound. I'll give you my example. I picked up running. I'm from Kenya. We were born running. And I always say this because we go to school and back. And we're always playing with sports and stuff. But I went away from running, and I recently got back in the last 16 weeks. And I started running for a friend's cancer charity. And that, he lost his son at the age of 8, I think. And as you know, I'm a dad. You're going to be a dad, and I think just the idea that you can raise awareness around a cause that can affect any one of us. So I think some people are driven by that as well, and that purpose that we talk about, the mission that we talk about, can vary. But a lot of runners want to feel part of something, and whether you're running across the street from each other, whether you're sort of running and you just nod. In London, not many people do this, but in when I run, for example, in Swindon, every runner says hello to each other.
Oh,
Every
really?
runner, no matter what.
Well, I know
age.
since I started running, I'm nodding at people more than I used to.
Yeah.
I'm getting the good morning.
Yeah, the good morning, the all right, mate, like,
Yeah.
you know, keep going, and that's the vibe, and that keeps you going, you know.
Do you think humans were meant to run?
Yeah, totally. Because if we looked at how we've adapted and how we've moved, and even just our sort of biomechanics of how we've evolved, running is a sort of survival instinct. You know, either running for gathering or hunter gathering, or running for survival, meaning escaping and going to safety. And then just from that as well, we're seeing just the art of running. There's like tribes who are in, don't quote me on this, but like in Namibia and like Africa, who run, I'm talking about like ultra distances, just in search of honey or in search of game and running after prey. So we are always born to run, and there's like all these books that are out there about running. I don't know if you've picked up your hands on any specifically, but you know, the Born to Run book, which is very, very apt. I think that would be a very, very good place to start.
And do you think the reason why sometimes we break down from running is purely because of the lifestyle we live now? Or do you think there's a mechanical issue going on whereby we aren't potentially meant to run?
Life's become too comfortable.
Yeah.
You're only running so that you can go and sign up to a 0.5K or 5K.
Yeah.
You've not been told, hey, there's a lion waiting outside your cave, and you've got to sort of move a little bit more. And I think as we've got comfortable, let's just take chairs for example. You know, back in the days we'd be sitting on the floor, eating, consuming our meals, whatever else. But now we don't need to do that anymore. You know, we've got the luxury, and I think more and more people now realize that actually there's something innate about running, and there's something sort of inbuilt within us that connects us to almost ancestors of like guys who've been doing this before us and before our time. And the way I run is like, just imagine how many people have been running before me. Sometimes in my head, I'm thinking about these things when I'm running, and like, you know, this is just going from one thought to another, and the tribes that have evolved from running. You look at the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, the East Africans, you know, they're winning at these big events because they've always done this.
When I'm running, I definitely get that sort of sense of that you mentioned. But also, I'm only starting to like the running process. For all the time before, I've pretty much hated it.
You hated the half marathon?
I hated it. Yeah, I did a half marathon in 2019 for a charity.
I remember that.
And I was running once a week, hated every mile of it. And the 2 hours it took me to run the half marathon, I hated every minute of it.
Yeah.
You know, it was dragging my heels for the second hour. I couldn't walk for a week after.
No.
So like for me now, doing 3, 4, 10Ks a week and just going about my day is very different to sort of 4 years ago.
Yeah.
What do you think has been your difference in that process, like between that half and your journey now at running when you lace up every time?
Well, I think with the half, it was, and I was part of a community that were raising money for charity, and for me, it was just like, I'm just going to do it with these guys. It wasn't self-driven.
Yeah.
Now I've got like a reason to do it. It's like, all right, well, if I run, it's going to improve my Muay Thai. I've got a fight coming, so it helps my fitness for my fight.
Yep.
Apparently, all Thai boxers run. So you know whether you could probably get the same cardiovascular benefits from other things, but you know you got to do it all, right?
Yeah.
And so there's just probably an element of that, and then seeing the times improve. But also, I don't know about you guys, but I've got this like, you know, that weird mentality where, you know, when you hate something like running, but you're doing it, and in your head you're like, you've just got to keep going because it's almost becomes a mental test to see, you know, how much further you can go. You know, we talk about the physical being the vehicle. It's exactly that. It's like, all right, if I can run an extra step, an extra mile, that means I've done something I didn't like doing today, and I've got through it. Because most of the runs, whilst I'm starting to enjoy the process now, I'm talking about it now while sitting down comfortably. On most mornings, I don't feel like running.
Oh, not at all.
And when your legs are screwed up, you know, it can be quite painful, right? You're running miles and miles when your calves are short, your shins aren't operating that well.
Absolutely.
I think getting comfortable with it, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I think one thing I hear with your story is something I hear a lot of is like with the early runner who's done like the Couch to 5K, which is like one of the most popular running programs. I think it's initially you like the idea of running, you like what it might potentially give you, you're just not comfortable with running. So every time you go out there, you can't wait for it to get over. But then I think as you go through the journey, then you reach this point where, okay, cool, it's another step, it's another kilometer, it's another mile. And then, then you start to realize, okay, cool, I'm just going to lace up and go because this adds so much value.
Yeah, and the hardest bit is
your
getting
next
those laces on.
Yeah.
The hardest bit is getting those laces on. But I speak to runners who, they run 2.5, a sub 3 hour marathons, and they still say they don't know why they run. No, because it's still so painful.
Yeah, I think you evolve that why we evolve.
Well, they say they still hate it because it's pain, right? It's a lot of pain, and it's different to weight training, because weight training, you do a set of 10, you have a rest. Yeah. That rest could be as long as you want it. Once you start running, you're not going to stop, right? And I mean, if you've got that mindset, you're not going to stop. You're just going to keep going, right?
Yeah.
And if you know you got to do 10 miles, you're going to keep going until you get to 10 miles.
Yeah. I think the hardest part is also the other side to it, where people can do 10 miles and they keep pushing more. And I think that's when we talk about sort of the next evolution of with the injuries and all of that stuff. But it's that constant that now I can do it. I want to do more. Let's take my example I injured my knee. I fell, random fall on the ice. I was like, yeah, it's fine. I went and ran a 5K that same night. I ran for 8 weeks straight after that, built up to a half marathon. Loved it. Part of a running community and all that. My leg gave way twice. I ignored it as a physio, classic, but then I was
turn this off right now.
Let me go and do the MRI.
Yeah, and this is why I don't treat him.
Yeah, we don't treat each other. Went an MRI, and it's like a stonking fracture on my knee.
Wow.
But you can see the power of running and the power of the community and the power of me lacing my shoes on and being able to go through a 6, 7 out of 10 pain because it just doesn't affect me. That pain is just like a side product that I'm happy to kind of keep on with because I can lace up and get out there. Because there's more value, you talk about the risk versus benefit. I found that there was more benefit me running than there was that risk.
Yeah, but that's also like that. It's a specific mindset.
Absolutely.
It can go easily wrong, right?
Absolutely. And it's gone easily wrong. I've had to pull out a London Marathon. So, and that's exactly where you are we talk about it and we'll talk about it next, but it's the injury mindset as well. And it's a very tough one to accept.
Well, before we go into injury mindset, let's talk about the catch to 5K. And it's quite a common thing you hear about. Sure. And it's often thought of as like a way to get fit. For the person who's never really trained, they're overweight, carrying too much body fat, they're not on any strength training or anything. They don't even know how to run. Yeah. They're doing a catch 5K. What are the dangers of firstly that scenario, but then also just for people who are overweight and out of shape to start running?
It's a tricky one. I think as a general program and the message of what it is, it's amazing. The issue is, unfortunately, is no one pathway is going to be beneficial for everyone because it's too generalistic. So you might have someone say, like myself, I might do the catch to 5K, follow it to a T, graduate from going to the couch, completing a 5K, have no niggles apart from having muscle soreness, which is normal. It's like going to the gym and saying, my muscles don't hurt. Like you're doing something, you're going to have an effect from the stimulus. You might have, say, someone like Rush who might inherently maybe be a bit more overweight, using the example you gave, and his progression from couch to 5K might need to be slower than what's recommended on that program. And unfortunately, he'll end up loading up way too early, way too fast, way too soon. And that could be anything from, getting technical, could be anything from muscle, tendon, ligament, joint, where that joint or that structure doesn't tolerate the load as well.
Yep. And
then as a result, he might pick up a niggle. Could be something quite mild, could be something a bit more sinister as well. So I think that's the pitfall of something like a couch to 5Ks. It's not for everyone. And there are a lot of success stories, but there's a lot of stories where people just haven't enjoyed it and then go, running's not for me. And I think it's not necessarily that running is not for you. It's maybe the way you've approached your journey to running or your approach to running.
And I think they'll use that as an excuse not to then change health, right? Or make health changes. So injury and just anything related to it's too much, it's too hard is the quickest way to stop something like a health change.
Yeah.
Because you talk about habit stacking quite a bit in your book and everything else. And habit stacking is that formation, but also an interruption like an injury. And we see all the time the lack of knowledge and expertise about yourself. That can also sort of interact with that sort of journey. And I've seen it multiple times where people download these apps because these apps claim to be the best ever, the best thing out there. And you see more injuries from the apps than you would see for someone who's just sort of listened to their body and understood what's right for them, what's not right for them.
So why is it dangerous for people who are overweight or carrying too much body fat to start running?
No, I think the general answer is no. And I wouldn't want to say,
yeah, interesting.
I wouldn't say yes, because the yes might be a very small percentage, but the yes is like got 5 asterisks attached to it, sort of thing.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is when I was a personal trainer back in the day, I used to never advise running until someone was in shape. They had the structure, they had the strength, and then if they wanted to do it, they could do it. My advice back then was always like no running.
Yeah.
Now I'm a bit, now I look around at runners and who's running in the park, and I see all shapes and sizes running.
Yep.
I don't know what their injury risk is. I don't know anything like that, but I'm starting to think about it a lot. Is like, is it safe for someone who's overweight?
I think you can do a lot of
maybe
stuff.
what are those 5 asterisks? Yeah.
I think it comes down to, do you have adequate strength capacity? I think that's one of the key things there. It's like, if someone comes into the clinic and sees me and they've never run, what am I going to do to ensure that they are minimizing their risk? So I'll do an assessment through joint to joint, from toe up to, hips. I'll have a look at the upper body as well. And I'll have a look and say, do you have adequate calf strength? Is your quad strong enough to stabilize? Are your hammies strong enough? And I'll go through that and I'll understand what their key deficits are. Are there any asymmetries? And I think you can do those things to help minimize some of your risk. But the key thing will come down to, how much are you actually doing? The issue that most people do is they'll go, I want to run, and they'll haven't run a minute in their life. And they'll go, okay, cool. They'll try run 5K, and they'll probably get there with pure will because they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But you've just given your body the stimulus, and your body's just gone, whoa, what have you just done?
Yeah.
It's like going into a gym and you've never deadlifted in your life, but you have some baseline strength because you're pretty fit and active, or at least you're young, and you can, oh man, I can deadlift 120 kilos, but then you're absolutely screwed for the next 2 days because you've never done that and your muscles just gone dumps for days. So I think you can do something quite similar where people just jump out of the gates. And so to that, I would say is just start off slow. Like, there's always going to be a point when you get fit and you can accelerate and push further. But to start off with, just learn your body, learn what it feels like to run, but learn what it feels like to recover from your run.
You gotta learn how to get fit for running rather than running to become fit. And that's the concept that we always sort of emphasize on, is like, you've got to get first your fitness up to be able to run.
What does that look like?
And a lot of times that might look like 2 to 3 strength workouts in a week.
Yeah.
Before you go and lace up and go 5Ks. Do you remember the time where we did COVID and we could only exercise for an hour outside our house, and everyone was giving each other 5Ks on social media, and they're nominating each person on their finger, and you and I were doing 5Ks like practically every day.
Yeah,
you just all of a sudden
injured.
Exactly. It's like 6 days a week, 7 days a week of 5Ks. We were like, man, I'm battered. But that's exactly what's happening out there. And running has seen a huge spike in increase in terms of like people taking it up. Run clubs, it's post-COVID, huge number of run clubs opening up. And even just the 5Ks and the 10Ks, everyone is doing a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon.
Yeah. And with the running, is there a difference between running on a treadmill and running outside, or does your advice apply? Do you see differences? Do you advise differently? What is the mechanical difference as well?
Yeah, for sure. There is a difference when you run on a treadmill. I think one of the key things is your speed is regulated, right? If you're on a treadmill and you've got it at 10 kilometers an hour, you have no choice but to run at 10K an hour. So that might mean that you're trying to keep up with the treadmill, especially if you're someone who has never run on a treadmill. I think that's really important. Like, we see some really good runners who run on road, but they've never run on treadmill. And you get them on the treadmill when you're trying to assess them, and you can just see they feel really uncomfortable. So I think knowing that you have any experience running on a treadmill, I think that's the key thing. So if you don't have some experience, maybe start off a bit slower, be a bit more interval based, where you might just jump on and off a treadmill just to get comfortable with it. But fundamentally, your pace is consistent. You might find yourself sort of potentially striding out a little bit on a treadmill. That might be something you might notice you doing as well. You might also find yourself trying to sort of run side to side, because the treadmill belt's quite narrow. You might find someone going side to side. So you got to be aware of these few things. I think that's probably one of the initial things. But that being said, you can also find these issues on road as well. So it's hard to say that there is one, I guess, fundamental difference. But I think speed is probably the one thing.
Yeah, and it's preference as well. Like in the colder months, no one wants to run outside. I should prefer running outside in the cold. But then people are just want to go treadmill running, and people swap as well. So you have this group of people that we see in clinic that go and do the intervals, for example, on the treadmill, but then they'll go and do everything else outdoors. And there's no right or wrong here. It's just, again, about like consistency and making sure that you're following that same routine throughout that sort of training block, or however long it's going to take you.
When you look at people running around on the streets, what are some of the top 3 mistakes you just think, right, these guys, if I could have them in a room with me,
Yeah,
sort this out.
it's interesting.
What do you see most common? Because since I come into the clinic, you point out some things that I didn't really know about, like overstriding. You told me to increase my cadence, land on the balls of my feet instead of my heels. So now I'm looking around. I was like, oh, what kind of cadence do you reckon? What kind of cadence are they doing? Or are they, head in line with the toes? All these things that you sort of picked up. What do you see like something? And then what's some tangible pieces of advice that we could give the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the performance side of things, there's a way that every person's different. It's like a golf swing. There's a million ways to kind of like swing a golf club. So it's very difficult to kind of answer.
Just give like a few avatars.
But I think there's a guy that's always sort of chasing his legs, as Adrian calls it. And this is basically his legs in front of him, and he's like stacked behind.
Is that me?
That was me. Yeah, that's definitely you. I'm the same as well. And then there are guys who are like
just for the listeners. Can you explain?
Yeah. So overstriding, and I think Adrian's probably better at explaining overstriding, but it's go
Come on, mate, you go.
Yeah, I'm going. So a lot of times where that sort of vertical shin that we're looking for performance perspective, but this shin angle that we're after, we don't want the foot to be further than the knee. We pretty much want that sort of shin to be as vertical as possible if we took a snapshot of you while you're running.
Yeah.
But again, I would say it's very difficult to assess people outdoors when they're running. It's very, very tricky.
Well, why is that difficult to keep a vertical shin, and why is it important? What does it do?
Yeah, so there's a difference.
Feel free to get technical.
Yeah, like absolutely. I think we'll get this expert over here, the London Marathon expert, talk about the sort of the forefoot, hind foot, and all of that stuff. But in my perspective, it's all about sort of trying to spend as little time on the ground as possible. That makes you as an efficient runner as possible, and then also how much load you're taking through each joint as well. I know we're not going to go down the injury route just yet, but there's some stats that are out there that show like just a change in a few things can reduce how much knee pain you're in, how much ankle pain or hip pain, and all these other things. So it's fundamental that each runner is individual, is different. But when we're out there, we definitely see the 2 or 3 types. What's your take on that?
I would say overstride for sure. So to what Rush is saying, I guess the cleanest way to say what overstride is when you are making contact well in front of your center of mass. So if you're running, your center of mass is going to be roughly in line with your hips. So your hip bone on the side there. But you can see someone could be forefoot or rear foot. So forefoot's when you're on the toes, rear foot's when you're on your heel. That point of contact is well in front. And that is typically seen with the line or the angle of your shin sloping forwards. Mm-hmm. So when Rush is referring to that sort of vertical shin line, it typically correlates with you then being closer to your center of mass. Why is that important? The best way I like to describe this is like a bicep curl, right? So if I gave you a heavy weight to curl, for you it's probably maybe 40 kilos.
Not quite.
But if I gave you a heavy bicep, a heavy dumbbell, the most advantageous position for you to repeat curls is from mid-range, right? You can just keep going mid to inner, mid to inner. If you go from the outside to the inside, you'll fatigue a lot sooner. If you're in the inner range, you're not really curling or doing anything, so your muscles lost all this contractile potential. And in a very similar way, I look at your stride being a very similar thing. So if you are making contact well in front of the line, it's like you're taking a bicep curl all the way through. So at a certain point, your body's going to give up and it's not going to have the capacity. If you're in mid-range, now you're bicep curling from your sweet spot. And then you can never be in the inner range.
It's a great analogy, by the way.
You can never be in the inner range because you'll just fall over flat on your face. So you don't have to worry about that, at least with running.
Yeah, interesting. So you got go on.
Yeah, that's the main avatar. And then I think the second one is
Sorry, before we go on to the next avatar, that you mentioned when you overstride, it doesn't matter if you overstride with your forefoot or your hind foot. Does that indicate that it doesn't matter, or is it?
It doesn't matter in terms of they're both equally, as I think. Bad's a really sort of negative word, but they're both equally sort of like negative towards your performance. So, a lot of people say, heel striking is really bad and forefoot striking is a better way to go. And they say that because a lot of elite runners will typically run on their forefoot. But if you track these elite runners through the course of, say, a marathon, they may start on their forefoot and they'll finish on their heel. But the point of contact is still within sort of like that really nice, perfect sort of contact position. They're not overstriding, they're still maintaining that. So, and we know that because of, you'll see other runners who will then be purely heel strikers and be fine. So it doesn't matter whether you're forefoot or rear foot, overstriding is overstriding, and that's something you want to try and improve on.
Got it. Do you want to go into the second avatar?
Yeah. So for me, second avatar is probably the person that is leaning forwards a lot, like really severe trunk lean. So we'll see, someone saying, I'm getting a lot of back pain when you run. You watch them run, it's like they've got a military 20-kilo backpack on there.
That's what I was doing in that video.
You were exactly. You were.
Yeah.
I think with the vest, with the
when I was topless in Phuket.
Yes.
And you were like, you messaged me. I'm running topless in Phuket. He messaged me going, he's come in. I got some serious inefficiencies going on.
Yeah, I was just like, looked at his running style, and I was like, literally from the video. This is what, like, you talk about the avatars, but we can spot these things. But it's like you're only seeing a snapshot of that runner.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we take through like a holistic screen of that runner itself. But yeah, that snapshot straight away, leaning forward.
A friend of mine messaged me saying, dude, you need to be bow upright. And then I start, when you run past shops, you can see some reflection. I realize I'm running like half bent over, like the hunchback.
There's like an optimal angle.
It's weird running upright, isn't it? Yeah.
So bow upright is also incorrect. Like, I think everyone looks at, it's Michael Johnson. Remember they were like 200, 400 meter American sprinter?
Yeah.
Still got the records. Like if you look at his sprint form, his upper body does not move. His legs are just turning under him. And people call that the perfect running technique. But if you semantics, that's more sprinting than it is running. But when you're looking at, say, running, which is 5K and beyond, or even say like a mid distance, you want to have a little range. So somewhere between 6 to 12, 6 to 14 degrees is your optimal sort of forward lean position, because you need that forward lean in order to let your hips extend backwards to give you drive, because your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves, they're your power muscles. So everything in the back is giving you drive. Because running is essentially its ground reaction force. You're lighting a match against the ground, and then that's helping you go forwards again. So whereas if you're bow upright, what happens is that you try and then go into hip extension repetitively, especially at pace, you start to then jackknife your low back. And that's why we see a lot of people have back pain, because they're just like trying to run
So they're overextending their back.
Yeah. It's the same thing you notice when someone's trying to do a deadlift and they're hyperextended at the top. It's like, adds no benefit. It's a hip hinge movement. It's not a back extension.
And what about your core? Are you bracing your core? Are you crunching down, or
not in a way that people think like you got to hold onto your core for dear life, right? Like the core is designed to switch on phasically. So as you sort of like breathe in, you'll sort of like you'll distend your diaphragm. As you breathe out, you'll lift up your pelvic floor, and then you have everything around it like a chamber. And that's universal for lifting and running. So I think it just comes down to how you're utilizing your core. And I think when you're looking at running, you're trying to avoid any excessive movements to keep economy. So you're trying not to crunch too much. You're trying not to extend too much. You're trying not to like laterally bend or rotate. So it's a lot of like counter movements or anti movements you're trying to do. So if I have someone coming in for a strength and conditioning session with me for running, I will get them to do, say, a Pallof hold or a Pallof press, because that's stopping them from laterally flexing too much, because that's what you want to do when you're running. You don't want to waste energy bouncing side to side and dawdling around.
It's also the sustainability of it. I might have caught you at the end of your run, for example. You might have started well, but then the endurance factor of you being able to hold that posture, form, it's one of the things that running forms, sustainability of that form is important. So we might put someone in a good posture, but have they got the efficiency and the energy and the durability to finish that? And that same form. And it's tough because it needs strength conditioning. And this is where fitness is so important, and strength training is even more important for runners. I'll give you an example. I had a runner come in yesterday with knee pain. He's running the Malta Marathon this weekend. And I asked him, so what are you doing for strength? And he was like, I just do stretches. And, and he's had this problem.
Which is not strength work.
And he does he wants to run 3 hours 30, and that's a great goal. And his dad has beat him at 3 hours 6, and he's trying to beat this goal. But, he's just doing no strength work at all. And he's got lots of knee pain and everything for 3 years. So these other things, like the time of injury, people can have injuries for years and they'll do nothing about it as runners.
With strength training for runners, is it just the standard exercises, split squats, step up?
Far from it. I think we've got too much now knowledge and data to show that we don't have to do a bog standard program for runners. It's the same as a traditional lifting, like one of your clients, for example. They'll have individualized programming done for them to an extent because they can't do a certain exercise, or they're not designed, or they don't need it. And say you were doing a performance coaching, because what we do is performance, right? It's all about trying to improve this person, which is what you do. But sometimes what we find is that there are too many people out there selling like a 12-week pack or 12-week cookie cutter program. And the same thing running strength work as well. It's like you've got a 12-week cookie cutter program that's just been bolted onto the plan that you bought from a coach or an online app, and it's dangerous because it has no relevance to you.
I might have to drop a caveat there because I've got a cookie cutter program.
Yeah.
Look, it's one of those things. I think you got to meet the runner where they are.
Of course.
right?
That's
And
with
I think-
everything. Yeah.
Yes. So, like for example, in any world, like if you got £50 to spend, you go get the best that £50 will give you. If you got £500, you go get the best at that level. So, can a cookie cutter program be a little bit dangerous potentially because it's not geared directly for you. So when I've got my general program that I sort of put online, I make sure that people understand that, okay, this is where you want to be. If you're not feeling comfortable, back off. So if you've got the right precautions in place, then it's not a bad thing. If you've got, say, someone who's got a bit more money, you can then sort of give them something a bit more, individualized. It's just one of those things.
So with the strength training runners, you say just for the average person who's not trying to go from 3 hours marathon to 2:30.
Okay.
Yeah, for the average person, what are some key strength training principles they need to follow or exercises that would really help? Is it that much different to traditional weight training or?
I don't think so. No, I think if you're doing things really well, not really well. If you're just keeping things really simple, that's good. So I would look at your fundamental movement patterns, right? So you got a squat pattern, so that's a front squat, back squat, goblet squat. You got a hinge pattern, so my favorite exercise, RDL, and then you've got a split pattern, so split squat.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd probably add on to that is calf raises because that's the one muscle as a runner that works harder than any muscle in your body. So anywhere from 5 to 9 times your body weight and force is what your calf muscle complex is working at.
Really?
Yeah. No muscle comes even near a close second. So your glute med, which is your lateral hip stabilizing muscle, works at about 1.5 to 2 times your body weight. Your big muscles are working, but because they're such huge muscles, then you need to work at like 0.8 times your body weight and force. If there's one exercise a runner gets when they come to see me, it's calf raise at some capacity, whether it's
every one of them,
double leg, single leg, body weight on a step with additional weight. You're doing some sort of calf raise because you shouldn't neglect it, especially as you get older.
Absolutely. There's a lot of false evidence as well that show that as we age, our skeletal muscle obviously changes, but the risk of falls goes exponentially higher as soon as you drop calf strength. So every elderly person that comes to my clinic, I'm always giving them calf strength. Single leg calf raises, double leg calf raises. I'm talking about anyone past the age of like 60, 65, do it. And you get them doing it every day. There's no harm in it.
Yeah.
Depends on the dosage.
Yeah.
If the dosage is light, you can do it every day. If the dosage is a bit more higher, you will need a day off or else you'll just get DOMs and you will just overwork the muscle.
I mean, your calves must be brutal right now with all that Muay Thai and
skipping
and everything else. And I gave him single leg calf raises as well.
I'm hopelessly weak in calves.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I think the issue is that people are starting to do strength work now as runners, which is great. It makes me really happy. People just don't do it to a level where the stimulus is adequate to facilitate a change. Like if someone comes to Akash, I want to get bigger biceps. I'm lifting 5 kilo dumbbells every day, but I still look so puny because like they're probably not lifting heavy enough. The intensity, the rate of perceived exertion isn't hard enough. And I think the same applies for strength work with runners. Like if you're not lifting something and if you finish a strength exercise and you go, I could have probably done another 5 sets. You're just not working hard enough for your muscles to get better. So you have to push a bit as well.
There is a caveat in that as well, just to kind of like be the devil's advocate. I think what sometimes happens is people push too hard, especially during a marathon build-up. So one of the things you have to do is change it, especially when you start picking up the mileage. You have to adapt the weight more. You don't have to lift heavier. Or sometimes you have to sort of scale that down to be able to run. Adrian's, and I'm going to use his line, but running is, the strength training it's an adjunct for your running, not the other way around. And then a lot of times it's about sort of making sure that the strength training is working for us versus sort of working against us.
It's that sweet spot, like Rush said. Like yes, you could do too much strength work and you could irritate your body because you'll be so fatigued. You go into your run is sloppy, your muscle, your joints, everything's overloaded. You might pick up a niggle. So you could go down that avenue, which you're completely right. You can go down the avenue where you're underloading, so you're not getting any change. So you have to find your sweet spot. It's
a similar process to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with what I'm doing Muay Thai, I'm trying to balance weight training, fitness, and Muay Thai.
Yeah.
And I've had to scale back my strength training from 4 days a week to 2 days a week. And I'm not really chasing strength gains or chasing those last few reps, which would normally cause the growth and strength because I know the recovery debt is too much, which would then impact my running, impact everything else. So for me, I don't need more strength or muscle right now. I need the other bits. So for me, I've just put it on maintenance. Yeah. And I suspect that's what you're talking about with dialing up and down the intensities.
Absolutely, but if you start to like following your process, like I've been a product of RNT, and one of the things I've learned is that actually, running falls really perfectly in that sort of process, because people can use it as a way to definitely do that sort of cardiovascular exercise that you guys encourage. But I think also from a monitoring a diet and strength work perspective, you're covering some very good pillars of just general good running health. And I think it's interesting to see now more and more people are moving towards adding cardiovascular system training in everyday sort of programming. Most of the sort of strength coaches out there are adding things like sprinting for the power athletes. They're getting people to be cardiovascularly fit because they see the longevity in it.
Yeah, there's so much evidence on for brain health, for energy, for all the heart benefits, cardiovascular. They go beyond just performance, right? So there's no downside to being fit.
Yeah, I think one of the things I guess I could ask you is like, do you see a lot of like clients or questions from clients regarding nutrition and running, or like how do they adapt nutrition around running, for example?
For those who are
running,
so we don't have many who are chasing extreme running performance goals. We'll have some instances where someone's saying, I want to do a half marathon or a 10K. In the rare instances, they may do a marathon. We've had a few who've done that, and they'll need to adjust their nutrition accordingly. And we usually use like some sort of formula. We'll say if you're doing this sort of mileage, add this much carbs to the day. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what those numbers are, but we usually adjust it like that, because you can't be on, say, 1,500 calories running 20-25 miles.
It's something I wanted to talk about actually, and I think leads us quite nice into a section of REDS, which is relative energy deficiency in sport. And it's one of those things where we have now this group of runners that are out there, predominantly female but also male, where eating less is seen as a sign of like bravery. It's almost seen as a sign of like, I'm consuming less carbs, less protein, and less fats, but I just want to put in mileage after mileage. And then they start seeing their bodies break down. So I'm talking about like stress fractures, hip fractures, shin splints, and shin pain predominantly. But like I'm talking about like not the classic shin pain that you and I would get just because we started running, but more from a bone breakdown. And Adrian and Eiling, one of our sort of RED specialists, sort of help these people overcome it. But it's a huge sort of it's almost like an epidemic right now.
I mean, that's probably a psychological thing more than anything. I mean, there's a physiological problem in that they're not eating enough and fueling their body, but that's not because they don't want to. It's probably more of a psychological issue.
It's definitely multifactorial. Yeah. Without making light of it, there's definitely people who are probably going through some sort of an eating disorder, have some psychological work that they need to do, and obviously they have, there's that element to it. There's also an element where people are trying to go for this whole power to weight ratio thing. If I'm lighter, I'm faster. And yes, it's true to a certain point, but if you can't run, then you're not fast at all. So
that's interesting.
So there's and it probably, maybe that part of it becomes more at the sort of like elite to sub-elite end, where you're pushing for places, you're trying to go through, and unfortunately running is riddled with like bad culture and those things as well. Like historically, if you get the chance to have an elite runner open up to you, I'm sure they will share a story with you that tells you about a coach or someone in a run club saying, eat less, or you look a little bit fat,
you put on a bit of weight. It's big, and it's out there, and
for sure
we're trying to change the scene and have topics around amenorrhea, the lack of menstrual cycles, the fact that women's hair loss or blokes losing their libido, and this is in the running culture, and it's already been
really, I know
behind this.
It's probably, I would go as far as saying it's probably in the health and fitness culture.
100%.
There's a lot of really fit. Let's if we're talking amenorrhea, which is a loss of your period, I'm sure there's a lot of really fit females out there that probably either aren't getting their period, aren't getting it frequently enough, or the flow of their period isn't as sort of like consistent as it should be. And why is that important? Is because when you're not getting your period consistently enough, and all those things that I mentioned, is your body's not producing estrogen or estrogen at a level that is consistent to what your body requires. And estrogen is one of the key hormones that helps with your bone uptake. So if you then put that in the context of running, you're not getting enough estrogen, your bones aren't turning over enough. So your normal bone goes through this beautiful process where you have bone building cells and bone decay cells. And you normally have a higher bone building to bone decay ratio, which means you have nice, healthy bone mineral density. When you don't get estrogen, now your bone decay takes over from your bone growth, and then you have bone breakdown. So you get a stress stress response becomes a stress fracture if you don't treat it.
Wow.
So, and we've seen this. We've seen fit female athletes who aren't runners get stress fractures, and we've seen obviously a ton of runners with stress fractures. And we ask every female runner that comes in. I'll sit there and say, look, I have to ask you, being a female runner, it might have nothing to do at all, or we might come onto something that you might want to address. And then I'll ask them questions around their menstrual cycle. And I think it's important that we normalize this, especially around males in the industry, like
male physios.
Male physio.
Yeah,
if you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have felt a type of way asking female runners about that, because I was like, I feel uncomfortable about it. Now it just
possibly even something, and I think you guys talk about it in your podcast in the past, and you've had some women's health experts that have come on board and talked about menopause and talked about perimenopause and talked about just the idea that you don't have to eat less to lose weight. And it's trying to squash that culture, but that culture exists far more.
Well, you do need to eat in a deficit, but you need to manage how you
not to the extremity that we see nowadays. And I think the problem with social media is that people only see one side of the story sometimes. And we've had people who've been GB athletes, we've had people who've gone through these journeys, and it's out there. And BBC is now only talking about it.
I had no idea about running culture like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that in running. Another industry that's riddled with that is ballet.
Yeah,
ballet
I can imagine
real
that.
Toxic that way.
Yeah,
and dance, if you want to put that all in one category.
So how do you approach that situation in your position, Adrian? You said you mentioned.
Look, it's very individualized. I try and I'll ask this question in the first session when someone comes in, because it's part of my normal history taking it and just safety checks. And if I feel like that person is quite open about it, maybe I'll have a conversation. I'll just start the inquiry and start to give them some knowledge with that. But the actual approach to maybe helping this person might take 3 or 4 sessions of me working with them, because it takes time to build rapport, and rapport means trust. So, if I tell them something from straight off the bat, they'll be like, cool, you're physio, you know what you're talking about, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here for this, right? So it might take a little bit of inquiry to sort of get into that sort of approach, but it's very.
Give us an example. Like, let's pretend I came into your clinic and I said, "Love," you asked me that question, and I said, "I haven't actually had a period
for sure
in a while, but I want to chase this marathon goal." What's the just pretend I'm the client.
Yeah, I would probably ask you what your thoughts are on that. Like, if you've had any knowledge, or have you spoken to someone about that? Do you think that's normal? Because I think it's really important to understand where someone is with that, and sort of that will give you an idea as to, are they going to be defensive about maybe taking on some advice and education, or are they going to be open towards it? So, if you come back and say, actually, I don't know much about it, and then I'll always say, are you happy for me to share some information? Because that means that then they're willing to accept what I'm about to say. And then from there, I'll give them some information. I'll say, normally we'll send to a sports medicine consultant, and I'll say, are you happy for me to give you a referral to a sports medicine consultant? It might be nothing at all, but if it is something, wouldn't it be nice to get on top of it early?
Yeah. So you're talking about like saving someone's career and, and someone's life, really, because sport is a vehicle to kind of like achieve a lot of things. But for some people, they've just never had that opportunity because of being injured, and these things never got picked up at that grassroots level, which is what we are. We are grassroots physios. The elite sometimes will have all these mechanisms in place, but the everyday runner that's not thinking about it, or even the sub-elite runner that's not thinking about it, they don't have access to these specialists on board.
So you guys refer out?
We would refer out, and then we'd also be thinking like there's blood tests involved, there's scans involved, DEXA scans involved, MRIs if we suspect an area. The cool thing about what we do is we can MRI someone very quickly, we can send someone off. But then there's a holistic approach around this. So I spoke about Eiling, one of our sort of REDS experts, and what she does is basically takes them through like these cumulative scoring systems where she basically puts them through these performers and assesses how risk at what scale they're on, and then converses with the psychologists or the sports docs that are involved, and works as a 360-degree view around this runner. So it's almost like this runner now gets protected by like lots of sort of medical professionals and feels cared for. And we've had people who basically, if they jumped on a podcast with us, they'd probably start crying at the start, at the point, because when we interjected was probably the best time they ever addressed this.
And when you refer out, and I'm assuming you're working with these practitioners that you're referring to, what are some of the things they're doing? I know it's varying very person to person, but what are some of the things?
If I send to a sports medicine consultant, they probably want 3 pieces of information. They would want, if we're suspecting a stress fracture, they'd want an MRI. they'd want a DEXA scan. A DEXA is like a low energy X-ray scan. So you sit on this bed, this beautiful sort of beam goes through you, like you're getting scanned in like Tron Legacy, and then it tells you exactly your bone mineral density in every part of your body, from your fingers down to your toes. It tells you your muscle mass. It tells you your water mass. It breaks down literally your body composition. I think it's something, on a side note, it's something great that everyone should do when they're on a fitness journey. But we can then see on that scan what their bone mineral density is globally, but also locally in certain areas, and if they fall below a normal sort of normative mean. So for someone, say like myself, I'm almost 33. If my bone mineral density is lower than what the average should be, then I'm probably at a risk zone there to pick up a stress fracture. So we can then understand if there's something at play over there. And then they'll get a blood test. The blood test will be a full blood count, having a look at a few different markers. Estrogen will be one of those markers, because if their body's not producing estrogen, that might then link everything up together as well.
Yeah.
And then, so those are the three things. And then from there, they're starting to work on different things. But it might be consultation with a nutritionist if we're identifying that person is not fueling themselves adequately. Like I said, it's not necessarily an eating disorder. Sometimes people might just think, yeah, I'm running, but I'm still eating 2,000 calories. But no, you're running 40 kilometers on the weekend. You need a lot more than 2,000 calories to fuel your run. So it might just come down to just getting the right nutrition.
Is there ever a case of like gaining body fat or gaining body weight, or is it usually a fuel issue?
It depends. It's a tricky one, because you do, like, in order to sort of keep a consistent period, you do need a certain amount of like epithelial body fat.
Yeah.
So that's like fat around your tissue. It's around 15% is what they say. So if you start to drop under 15% body fat, that then starts to minimize your likelihood of having a period. Obviously, if you're on contraception, different story altogether. So to go back to what you're saying, there is an element where someone might need to pick up a little bit of body fat, but 15% is minimal. Like, you could be.
And it's very lean as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. People think 15% is fat. It's like, no, it's not.
For a woman, that's extremely lean.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to also not just runners, but also just athletes and people who are on these CrossFit programs, and people who are these influencers that they keep smashing. I think we've got a couple of stories of people who've had like pelvic fractures or stress responses from the idea that they just train 5-6 days a week. So it's interesting. It's growing. The awareness is growing, which is really important. But I think there's a lot, and I think podcasts like this hopefully sort of shed that light on it.
Yeah. If we circle back to it a little bit earlier, one thing you guys were talking about, the 3 avatars. Cover 2.
Yeah.
I want to know what the third one is.
Third one. It's a tricky one. I wouldn't say
all the gear, no idea.
I would say probably the person that crosses over their gate a lot. Like, if you think about a straight line down the middle of the road, like their foot's directly on that line. So that's
walking on like a tightrope.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably the third avatar you'll see there.
Yeah, yours are not like that.
Don't know if I'm doing that one, yeah.
Yours actually is the opposite way, where you pretty much run with your feet in almost like a V-shaped position. Yeah, we have a running joke, so it's a duck foot position, but it's
definitely duck footed.
Yeah. But it's
definitely that one. That, or someone who's running at a cadence that's way too fast. Like, I've had people come in and their cadence is like, someone my height, typically if you're taller, your cadence is generally lower, and they'd be running at like a cadence of like 200, which
really?
is like, which is like trying to be like Roadrunner, and it's just like it's just like their legs are just going so fast and their body's catching up, and it looks like comical. So I think that's between crossing over your feet, we call that a crossover gait pattern, and maybe like a cadence that's way too high. It's probably tied for 3.
One thing when I came into your clinic is, you were like, the first thing I did when I came in, Rushabh was like, "Why are you wearing those shoes?" What's wrong with that?
What were you wearing?
I was wearing my new Night Tempos bright neon orange shoes that I just bought, right?
Okay.
And I thought
running shoes, Nike.
No, they're running shoes, but he's wearing them everywhere.
But I thought they were I was wearing them like fashion shoes, right? Because they're so comfortable, aren't they?
They're very comfortable.
But it brings me on to the topic because of shoes and attire. And I'm starting to go down that rabbit hole of, I'm wearing underwear now, I'm wearing the Nike running socks, and all these things. Like, they make a little bit of difference. Yeah. But what sort of clothing considerations you need to have if you're a recreational runner? Let's start with shoes. Because
firstly, don't let Rush tell you what.
I used to run 10Ks.
Had to teach him what shoes are.
I used to run 10Ks in Air Maxes, so I'm definitely not the guy you want to get advice from.
I mean, that's what you heard, right?
I think what Rush is probably leaning towards is like, if you got a pair of running shoes, preserve the shoe, so that way you don't lose the qualities of that shoe. So they have a certain level of sponge and stiffness. if you walk around in it and you're just racking up Ks, then you're not going to get that responsiveness from the shoe. But I think shoe wise, it's a minefield, because you could spend a lot of money and you can spend very little money, and you might I think there's a new shoe brand coming out every year these days. If you go to a shop, like a running shoe shop, they'll put you on a treadmill. They'll get you to run barefoot. They'll say, "Oh, your foot does this," and they'll put you in a box and a pair of shoes.
Really?
Yeah. So they'll sell the
seen
pronation. They'll sell the whole, and we can lightly touch on it because that's a podcast on its own. But overpronation, they'll tell everyone.
You know what? I've had this. You know, from our half marathon.
Yeah.
I went to
Runner's Need or
I think it was Runner's Need, and I got stuck on the treadmill. Told all over pronating. Got given a pair of Asics.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely get banned by Runner's. No, you don't do that. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's a bit of a they're just objective studies sort of looking at your feet, but they're not necessarily doing anything with it. And even if they put you on a treadmill, a lot of the times that's not the shoe that you need. It's a lot to do with comfort. For me, the biggest thing is actually comfort is the biggest thing.
There's no definitive research to show that one running shoe is better than the other or better for one person. So they've done like a lot of studies. It comes down to 3 factors. So, I mean, this is, if you want to save this portion, this is probably, if you're talking about shoes, comfort is paramount. Find a shoe that's comfortable for you. Number 2 is find a shoe that fits your foot. So you got a nice fat foot like me. Don't get a narrow shoe like a Nike Racer where your foot's all cramped up and it's mushing up the mold of your shoe. So get a shoe with what we call a wider toe box, with the toes a bit wider out. Your feet and your toes can splay out, be a lot more comfortable. And I think what another issue where people do is they'll buy their running shoes the same size as they'll buy their sneakers or their casual trainers. They'll buy it to fit nice and snug. You always want to buy your running shoe half a size bigger, because when you run, there's a bit of slide forwards and backwards where your foot needs to move within the shoe. And if you've got a shoe that's snug, your toe keeps jamming up in the front. And then that has a carryover reaction, not only at your toes, but in through your midfoot, your rear foot, and then higher up into the chain as well. So those are the top 3 things to look at with shoes.
Oh, wow.
So you look at, how were your toes after the half marathon? Were they black and blue?
I can't remember. I couldn't walk for a week.
They were. Yeah.
But these night tempos are beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and if you feel comfortable in them and you feel good and you run well,
it was great.
Yeah, really good. And I think what's interesting to see is also like how people utilize shoes, and they'll keep changing around shoes. And this whole debate about I need to use my race shoes on race days, and then people go and buy Vaporflies. But we've had incidences come into the clinic recently where they've been training in Vaporflies, but the cadence isn't good enough to use a carbon foot shoe. And it's like, just because Kipchoge is using those or someone else is using those, it doesn't mean they're the right ones for you. And it's insane. It's all about sort of trying to get that right proportion.
You got to cycle through it. Like Rush said, you could be someone who's probably not ready for carbon shoes, because carbon shoes have a huge recoil where that carbon plate will then sort of give you a boost of elastic energy. So if you're not strong enough, your tendons aren't stiff enough, you could pick up something like an Achilles tendinopathy. But you could also go down the avenue where you might be strong enough, but you just overdo it. Like we've had runners come in and do all of their runs in carbon shoes, and then it's just too much load in that. And once again, you could have something like an Achilles getting pissed off again.
Yeah.
So you got to find that balance. And that's kind of what Rush is leaning to, is like a lot of runners will cycle through shoes or have like a shoe for a faster run. Maybe that might be a carbon shoe or like a lighter shoe. They might have a shoe for an easy run, which is a bit more sort of like cushioned and comfortable. And then they'll have their race shoe. And what that allows you to do is, firstly, you get variability across different shoes. So your foot is constantly adapting to something that's not just getting stagnant. It's like it's like lifting the same weight every day for the whole year. You're not going to get stronger.
Yeah.
So your feet are getting some sort of variability. And then the second thing is you're also then preserving your shoe as well, because you're not running through one shoe too quickly.
They're expensive.
So yeah, especially like a carbon Nike, like Nike's about to drop a Vapor 3. That's going to be 240, 260 pounds.
Yeah. Wow.
And they don't last that long, those carbon shoes. You get about 250K from it.
Yeah. So if you do the maths, 3 months.
And like your shoe will give you about 500 to 600 Ks depending on how you run and things like that.
Wow. Even then, it's not like a huge amount.
Right? Yeah, it's not a lot.
What about warm ups? Something before we got on air. Adrian said to me, "You just lacing up in the morning and heading out there." I'm like, "Yeah, pretty much." He's like, you're probably better off with a plan. And a lot of things you guys have discussed so far has been about optimizing to not get injured, right? Yeah. Whether it's a stance, whether it's shoes, whatever it may be. What about warm ups? Like, is it a case of swinging your leg up and down? What should you be doing?
Best warm up is for running.
A slow run?
Go slower.
A walk?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best way to walk is just walk. Start walking slowly, brisk up your walk. The objective of warm-up is to fire up your nervous system, is to lubricate your joints, very simply, right? So walking will do that for you. You can also do some other stuff like squats, lunges, some movements, some skips, some drills, things like that, depending on your level of experience. But walking is the best warm-up.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And even cool downs, like, one of the things that people do, they'll stretch and hold these stretches after a run, to make them feel good, and say, I'll just pause my watch a little bit now. And the reality is just cool down by walk.
Stretching's overrated.
Yeah, stretching is overrated. Say no to stretching. It's the movement that me and Adrian are creating.
For running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I think stretching is over. Unless you're someone who practices the art of yoga consistently daily, where you're getting an hour worth of yoga and you're in those positions and you're getting prolonged exposure through a week, then you're probably getting some flexibility benefits. But if you're, poor old Joe and Jane doing a park run and then just doing a 1 minute hamstring stretch after your park run, I think bugger all.
Yep.
Yeah. You might as well just go and sit on your sofa.
Yeah. And then the other thing is just like, I think even just like having the idea that you don't necessarily need to do these fancy stuff where you might see people on YouTube doing, which is, shaking their legs out and like getting these massage guns and the recovery guns and stuff. And it's like, everyone wants one of those guns after they run straight away and stuff. But, good nutrition, good sleep, these are the powerhouses of recovery first and foremost. Everything else is just secondary.
So if someone's listening to this on their walk and they're thinking, I'm going to break out into a run, what are some of the key technique cues they need to remember? You said some things earlier when you were talking about the different avatars.
Sure.
If you were to sum it up, what are some key technical points that the general runner should be paying attention to?
For sure. I mean, if you're starting off your journey, don't race out the gates. Keep your running easy. Keep it conversational. I say you should be able to sing your favorite song whilst you're running. That's a conversational pace where you're not out of breath as you're trying to go through your stride. It might be a little bit challenging when you're first starting because your body's all over the place and your nervous system's confused, but that's what you want to aim for. And you want to aim for keeping your steps nice and short and sharp. So you're not sort of like striding out and getting lazy like a giraffe. You want to just stay nice and sort of compact. So stay compact, make sure your pace is conversational. Of course, if you're a bit more experienced, then you'll probably be dabbling in different types of runs. If you're doing an easy run, then keep your easy runs easy. One thing that a lot of experienced runners get into trouble is they'll say, I'm going for an easy run, but you look at their pace and you go, that's not an easy run. You're working at effort there. Your heart rate's telling you you're working at effort. And unless you're Elliot Kipchoge, you're working at effort.
Yeah.
So slow down, make your easy runs easy, and then you have different variances with your other runs.
Yeah, your tempos, your intervals, and everything else. The other one is just practice gratitude. You're out there running. There's a lot of people who can't be doing what you're doing, and I think sometimes just bring that out of stillness back into your everyday movement is so important. We live in such a fast-paced world that when you're running, the idea is to connect with yourself. So I think you sometimes run without music or with music. Sometimes, we recommend with that, whatever helps. But it's important to connect.
Mindset running, like I'm not coining it. It's not my term, but that's something I practice. I will leave everything but the keys to my house. I'll just go out with my keys. No phone, nothing. It's 30 minutes to myself to process any thought that comes into my mind, and it's the best 30 minutes of my day.
Yeah, doing a long run unplugged isn't the easiest thing.
Yeah,
no.
But it's
put you in front of your mind.
Yeah, for sure. And that's like if you're learning to run long distances and say, for example, marathon, like that's one of the best ways to train your mind is to plug away from the music, because when it comes down to kilometer 35, 36 and you're hitting that proverbial sort of brick wall in a marathon, your mind is then a lot more resilient to then tackle that brick wall as opposed to trying to find, your next Tupac song going, oh shit, I swear it was on my rotation, and you lose it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is also like just making sure that you've let someone know that you're out there. Like, I think it's not winter anymore, but I think it's not uncommon to hear. The Strava apps are fantastic to let someone know that you're running out there, and you're letting someone know that you're running out there. I think one of the things is the safety as runners is important. You hear of horror stories, but you're out there. It's to enjoy yourself. But what you want to be is also safe and secure.
That's a good point, actually. So when I was preparing for this half marathon, one of the runs I had to do was in India, when I was away in India. And it was in February and I was on Juhu Beach.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And I made this idea to go for my 8-mile run at midday in Juhu Beach wearing black.
Ooh.
So I was running up and down, like baking hot. And it was getting to like mile 6, mile 7. And I'm not one to stop anything when it comes to physical activity. But I was like, I think I'm actually gonna pass out.
Yeah.
So luckily, I was going just up and down. So the hotel was like halfway through. Got to like -6.5, and I had to stop. So I had to go to the hotel. Walked in, and my parents were like coming towards the entrance. I don't know how they knew. Like the timing was so weird. And I was on the verge of collapsing from just heat exhaustion, dehydration.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
and then they had to get me rehydration solutions and all sorts. And I was thinking, like,
it's powerful, man.
If I didn't like stop at that point, I could have just collapsed on the beach in the middle of nowhere, right?
This is where you'll see marathon runners collapsing when they're out there running as well. You know, exhaustion is a big one, but I think safety is so important out there when you're running. You know, it's paramount to everything we do.
We're seeing that a lot now as well. Like the last 2 London marathons have been really hot towards the back end, and we've seen a lot of people passing out towards the finish line. So, I mean, get your hydration on point. Like, carry something with you. You got like hydro backpacks. You got these like little waist straps so you can carry a little water thing with you. So you almost have no excuse to carry a bit of sort of liquid with you. And worst case scenario, don't worry about what your watch says and your stop time. Just pop into your off license, grab something to just get yourself going. So if you're in Juhu Beach, go to one of those Gola guys and
just
next time. But I think just get your hydration. Like, there's been a lot of unfortunate episodes in like last year's London Marathon. I think someone passed away from heat exhaustion, and they had a cardiac arrest. And then the same thing happened at the Hackney Half last year as well. So it's unfortunate. It's hopefully doesn't taint the sport or deter anyone away, because these are very isolated incidents.
Small incidences.
But, you know, for the most part, just get your hydration right and you'll be good.
Yeah.
Cool. So where can people find out more about some of the amazing stuff you guys are doing at the Running Room?
For sure. Instagram is a great space. So at the Running Room on Instagram is where you'll find us. Rush has his own handle. I've got my own handle. So it's my Physio Adrian. So at it's my Physio Adrian on Instagram, and I'm always putting some content out there on running, whether it's an exercise or an injury.
Yeah.
So,
Ours is at r.d.physio or at rush.physio. But you know, I just want to squash a myth that running does not ruin your knees.
If you use the techniques that you guys have talked about, your knees should be fine.
Absolutely.
The big thing I took away from this is just take it slow, take it and build it up slowly.
Yeah, enjoy the process.
And then optimize the technique as you go along.
Yeah, super excited.
It's a journey, right? Like, you're not going to be your best version in your first race or your first month of running. Same way in any other fitness journey. So I think sometimes it's an Amazon Prime generation. Everyone wants something the next day.
Yesterday.
So people aren't willing to put the effort in, or aren't willing to be patient enough. So I think if you can calibrate your expectations, you're laughing.
Amazing. Well, I've been to the Running Room. It's a state-of-the-art facility in the heart of London. You guys are doing some amazing work out there. So anyone in London or nearby who want to get their running technique optimized, definitely go check it out. I've knocked some seconds off my average times already. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do in the coming months.
Grateful. Thank you.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on.